The ravens always came at dawn, it seemed. The light in the camp outside was thin and gray, the kind that turned mud to iron and men to shadows, and the sounds were muted, murmured orders, the clink of harness rings, the distant whicker of horses. Inside the command tent, the world narrowed to parchment and carved wood and the smell of wax and wet wool. Robb Stark leaned over the map as if he meant to wrestle answers from it. The twisting lines of the rivers, the painted little towns, the inked crown that marked King's Landing, the painted lion of Casterly Rock. None of it shifted no matter how hard he stared. Gray wind paced once around the trestle table, claws clicking lightly on the beaten earth, before settling against Robb's boots with a low huff. "The South won't move because you glare at it," Theon Greyjoy had told him the night before, half in jest, half in whine. It had earned a wry smile from Robb then. There was little humor left in him now. The tent flap stirred, cold air knifed in, and with it the smell of river mist and cooking porridge, steel and horse. Catelyn Stark stepped inside, drawing the flap closed behind her. The thick wool of her cloak rhymed with a lace of frost. Her auburn hair was braided back, streaked with gray that had not been there when they'd first ridden south. Her eyes went first to her son, then to the black-feathered shape perched on a wooden stand near the far pole. "Another raven?" she asked. Robb straightened, rolling the stiffness from his shoulders. "From the south." He picked up the short, tightly rolled scrap of parchment, already slid open. "From Ser Brynden, carried on from Bitterbridge." At the sound of her uncle's name, Catelyn's expression sharpened. "And what word does the Blackfish send that cannot wait for a proper letter?" "That the south thunders," Robb said. "And that we'd best learn whether it's a storm that breaks the lions, or one that breaks us as well." He offered her the scrap. The script was small and tight, crammed to fit the short strip, Brynden Tully's hand. Catelyn read in silence, lips moving. "Renly Baratheon, 100,000 swords. Tyrell roses opening to Baratheon stags. Tents like a city around Bitterbridge, colors like a summer tourney, and beneath it all the iron weight of men in armor." She read it twice before lowering the parchment. "So it is true," she said quietly. "Renly Baratheon has crowned himself, and the Reach has bent the knee. He has more men than Tywin Lannister and I together," Robb said, "according to Uncle, and more food than the Riverlands will see in a year." His mouth twisted. "Brynden says the ground shakes when they march. That's the thunder he writes of. Greedy men, Ned would have called them." Another usurper king, Catelyn thought, clutching her cloak tighter at the throat. Robert had taken the throne in fury and drink. Stannis held his claim like a cold iron rod, and now Renly, smiling Renly, had crowned himself with flowers and steel. The realm had too many kings and not enough peace. "What would you have me do, mother?" Robb asked. His voice was hoarse with lack of sleep. He had been a boy the last time she looked at him properly and saw only a boy. Now there was a hardness at his jaw, lines carved at the corners of his mouth. "Ignore him and pretend 100,000 men to the south are no concern of mine? Ride at Tywin Lannister and hope Renly decides he likes my banner well enough not to cut me off from behind?" Grey Wind's ears pricked, as if he understood the tension in his master's voice. Outside, a horn called, long and low, signaling the changing of the watch. Catelyn folded the scrap of parchment between her fingers until it was no more than a creased white pellet. "I would have you remember that we are not the only ones with cause against the lions," she said. "The Lannisters killed his brother as well as your father. If Renly truly means to wear a crown, he must break Tywin. So must you. Better two hammers striking the same anvil than one hammer breaking beneath the blow." Robb's mouth flattened. "You would have me bend the knee?" "No." The word came out sharper than she'd intended. She took a breath. "No, Robb, I would have you talk. A king may make alliance with another king, if both are wise enough to see beyond their pride. Renly is a younger son who has never sat a throne before. You are a boy who never asked for one. That may be a mercy. Pride comes easier to those who spent their lives reaching." Robb's eyes went to the carved direwolf that sat astride the riverlands. Someone, Theon most likely, had carved a tiny wooden crown for it, set crooked upon its head as a jest. It did not look like a thing to laugh about now. "I have called the banners, and they have named me king in the north," he said softly. "If I ride south to talk, I do it as a king, not as some high lord begging favors." "Then ride as a king," Catelyn said. "But hear the thunder, Robb. If you pretend it is only weather, you may find yourself washed away in the flood." He looked back to the map, to where Bitterbridge was marked with a small ink dot far to the south. Somewhere beyond that dot, Renly Baratheon sat beneath a golden crown while 100,000 swords rang in the morning air. Robb's jaw tightened. "Call the lords," he said. "If the storm is coming, they should hear it too." The lords of the north and Trident came with the cold. The tent filled quickly, heavy furs brushing against each other, the murmur of harsh voices weaving through the flicker of torchlight. The canvas walls swayed slightly with each gust of dawn wind, snapping at the ropes like a restless beast. The great Jon arrived last, barreling in with a booming laugh that did not reach his eyes. "What's this Southron thunder your uncle prattles on about?" he demanded before he'd even thrown back his hood fully. "I've heard naught but Lannister whimpers since we broke their host at Whispering Wood." Catelyn wondered if he truly believed his own bluster, or if he simply preferred it to worrying. Roose Bolton came more quietly, pale as unspilled milk, his pink flayed man hanging at his breastbone like a bloodless mockery. Robb waited until they had all taken seats or places around the table. Karstarks, Tallhearts, Hornwoods, small river lords still gaunt from burned fields. "You've all heard the tales from the south," he began. "Renly Baratheon calling himself king, the Reach riding with him." "Fool's tales," growled Rickard Karstark. "I've no time for green boys playing at crowns. The lions sit at Harrenhal still, do they not? Tywin's the only storm I care for." "Renly's no boy," Theon said lightly, though his fingers drummed restlessly on the edge of the table. "He's full-grown and well-liked besides, if half what I heard on Pike's true. And these are not hedge knights he's gathered. These are Tyrell men, armored from throat to spur and fat with harvest. And when those fat knights ride north with their pretty banners, you'll wish you'd paid them more mind," Catelyn said before the quarrel could grow teeth. "Lord Brynden has seen the host himself. He writes that Renly's camp stretches from horizon to horizon. 100,000 men, maybe more. They can feed themselves. We cannot say the same." Silence fell for a heartbeat, broken only by the hiss of pitch in a torch cup. The great Jon snorted at last. "Let them come," he said. "We'll feed them steel." "That would be easier to do if they were not our enemies," Robb said. His voice cut through the bluster, quiet but hard. "My lady mother believes we may make them our allies." Several men began to talk at once. Karstark's mouth twisted. "Renly is a traitor twice over," he spat. "He denied his elder brother's claim and now raises sword against the true line as well. I will not put my sword beneath such a man's banner." "You won't," Robb said. "No man here will. That is not what I propose." He glanced to Catelyn, then back to his lords. "I am king in the north. Renly is king in the south. The Lannisters sit between us like a corpse that refuses to lie still. Let us break them together and divide the spoils." "You'd make compact with a Southron king after so many men died shouting your name?" Karstark demanded, eyes bright with fury. "My sons." "I know what your sons paid," Robb said, and there was grief in his voice now, beneath the steel. "I carry the price of every man who followed me. This is not about kneeling. I'll not bend. But if Renly Baratheon means to war on the lions, we'd be fools indeed to fight him as well." Two swords cut deeper than one. Roose Bolton's voice slid softly into the space. "You assume he will be content with half a realm," he murmured. "Renly Baratheon never struck me as the sort of man pleased by sharing his toys. What happens when the lions are dead and the stags turn their antlers north?" "We'll be ready," the great Jon growled. "And if we are not?" Roose's eyes were unreadable chips of ice. We weaken ourselves hunting Lannisters while the south grows fat on rich grain. Their fields are untouched. Our men march hungry. Our men march, Robb said, and it was not quite an answer. He felt the weight of their gazes, of every man who'd named him. We hold the Riverlands by the throat. Tywin cannot move without showing his neck, not while our outriders harry his foragers. But it cannot last. We grind each other to bone and dust, and meanwhile 100,000 swords to the south wait to see which of us bleeds out first. He moved the little wolf token southward, to the ink mark that was Bitterbridge. With the other hand, he pushed a carved stag up from the south, until wolf and stag faced each other across the rivers that fed into the Blackwater. We march to meet him, Robb said, not as vassal, as king to king. We see whether Renly Baratheon would rather make common cause against lions or add wolves to his hunting trophies. Catelyn watched the faces. The Greyjohn's eyes shone with the promise of another great ride and another great victory. Karstark's mouth had set in a hard line, but he did not speak further. Roose Bolton's gaze dropped to the map, thoughtful, as if he were carving the path in his mind already. At the very least, Theon drawled, think of the look on Lannister faces when they hear two kings ride together. Lions don't like thunder half so much when they're trapped between storms. Some of the tension broke. A few of the river lords even smiled. Catelyn did not. She could feel the shape of the choice hardening around them like ice. Once set upon a course, turning back would be harder than going forward. You cannot take all your strength south, Roose said at last. Someone must hold the Riverlands. Whoever holds the rivers holds the lion's throat. Robb nodded. I'll leave strong men here, men the lions fear. His eyes found the great Jon, who squared his shoulders, and then Roose, who inclined his head a fraction. But I ride. If the south thunders, I won't cower in my tent and hope the sound passes by. The council scattered slowly, like crows reluctant to leave a battlefield. Voices faded, footsteps trailed off, and the camp outside roared back to life around the decision. Smithies ringing, sergeants barking, grooms cursing as they checked harness and hooves. Men were never so alive as when they knew they would soon be asked to die. Catelyn left the tent by the back flap, slipping into the cold. The Riverrun walls loomed above her, familiar and strange all at once. Her father's castle, and yet she had not lived within its stones for years. The banners flapped sluggishly in the wind. Leaping trout, dire wolf, flayed man, roaring manticore, all jostling together above the ramparts like heraldic ghosts. She picked her way down to the riverbank, boots sinking slightly in the damp earth. The Tullus owed their strength to the rivers, Hoster had told her as a child. 3 currents joining made their seat strong. Water fed their fields, filled their moats, carried their trade. Now the same waters bore the dead south, wrapped in cloaks or nothing at all, their faces eaten clean by fish before they ever reached the sea. The river looked black in the failing light. Bits of leaf and broken reed spun past on the current, caught for a moment in an eddy before being dragged on. It was easy to imagine crowns, too, bobbing on that flow. Robert's stag, Joffrey's twisted lion, Renly's bright antlers, all flung downriver by a force none of them could master. She clasped her hands together beneath her cloak. Once, she would have gone to the sept and knelt before the painted faces of the 7. But the little sept within Riverrun's walls was too small to hold all that pressed at her chest now. The river was wide enough, took what came to it and asked no questions. Lord, give him sense, she whispered, though she was no longer certain which lord she meant. The father who weighed men's fates, the warrior who guided their swords, or the nameless gods men called upon when no sept was near and no weirwood either. Give him the wisdom to know which wars to fight, and the strength to set aside those he cannot win. The breeze lifted the edge of her cloak, snatching her words apart. Somewhere upriver a horn blew, answered by another on the walls. She imagined ravens cutting southward through that same twilight, black flecks against the sky. Messages were flying everywhere now. Silk threads binding lords and kings, truces and betrayals tangled together. Renly Baratheon. She remembered him as a boy at Storm's End, laughing in Robert's shadow, all charm and easy grace, the very image of what men imagined a young king should be. Yet it had been Stannis who held Storm's End through siege and starvation. Stannis who clenched his jaw until the bones showed in his cheeks and refused to yield. If there was justice in the world, the elder brother would sit the throne before the younger ever touched it. But the world was not just. Ned's head had rolled on a sept stone while they cheered a golden boy in silks. Catelyn watched the water slide past, dark and implacable. If Renly truly had 100,000 men, he could no more be ignored than a flood breaking a dam. She thought of Robb, standing over his map with a crown of carved would askew on his direwolf. He had not asked for that crown. The North had thrust it upon him in their grief and fury. That did not lighten its weight. If he rode south and Renly proved false, the North might drown in the attempt. If he stayed and ignored the thunder, the South could rise up behind him while he grappled with Tywin. Every path led into fog. She had seen enough winters to know what happened to those who waited too long to move once the cold came. "You would have hated this, Ned," she murmured. "You who liked your truths plain." Her fingers tightened until the knuckles ached. Whatever else came, Robb would not face it alone. She had left Winterfell once to save him and her daughters. She would ride again to keep him from being isolated between larger storms. She thought of Renly's bright smile, the glittering Tyrells at his side, the honeyed words that would coat any bargain. If they were to put their faith in thunder, she would see the storm with her own eyes. The camp quieted by slow degrees as night fell. The clang of hammers faded first, then the training cries, the laughter and curses. Fires burned low. Voices softened, turned inward. Men speaking to the comrades they would ride beside, to the loved ones they might not see again, to gods who might or might not listen. In Robb's tent, the candles had burned nearly to stubs. Wax ran in pale rivulets down their sides, pooling on the wood. The air smelled of tallow and leather, damp canvas and the faint copper tang of steel oil. Outside, gray wind lifted his head at each passing tread, then settled again when the footsteps faded. Robb had stripped off his mail hours ago, leaving only a linen shirt and worn breeches. The weight of steel had been replaced by the weight of ink and wood, the carved tokens, lines on the map, the scrawl of letters from distant lords. There were more letters now than partners to answer them, more demands than hours in the night. "You do not have to go yourself," Catelyn said softly. She sat on a low stool near one of the tent poles, hands folded in her lap. Her back ached from a day walking the walls and the camp, but she would not let it show. Robb's head snapped up as if she had struck him. "Send a lord in my stead, you mean? Who?" The great Jon would challenge Renly to single combat before the day was out. Roose Bolton would smile and promise anything, then count the ways to turn it to his own profit later. The river lords have lost too much to see beyond their fields. He shook his head. "If I mean to call Renly my equal, I must stand before him as one king to another." "You are not your father," Catelyn said. The words came out before she'd weighed them, and she saw them bite, saw the flicker of hurt behind his eyes. Ned rode south to serve Robert, to be his hand. He knew the man he went to loved him once. You ride to bargain with a stranger who wears your friend's face but not his soul. There is danger in that. "There is danger in every breath I take now," Robb said. "In every step. I've broken the lion once. He'll not forgive it." The phrase grind their teeth every time they look at me. Balon Greyjoy sits his rock with his own old wounds to nurse. If I stand still, I give them time to sharpen their knives. If I move, I might at least choose where they try to cut. He dragged a hand through his hair, making it stand up in rumpled waves. In that moment he looked very young, and Catelyn's heart twisted. He should have been anywhere but here, at Winterfell, arguing with Maester Luwin over some bit of lore, teaching Bran the sword, laughing with Jon in the yard. Jon. The name came like an ache. She pushed it aside. "You will leave men here?" she asked. "Strong men to hold Tywin, if he lives." And the fords. Roose to watch Harrenhal, Robb said. The great Jon at the Twins, with enough men to keep Lord Walder honest. I'll take the best horse, the quickest outriders. We move fast, strike faster. Make Tywin fear both directions at once. Roose Bolton is not a man to trust with too much, Catelyn said. He's a man who makes our enemies bleed, Robb countered. I need that, and the great Jon will be there to shout sense into him if he tries anything. He tried a smile, faltered. She studied him in the candlelight. The boy she had nursed knew how to laugh easily. This new king carried his mirth like a blade, drawing it only when he wished to cut. He spoke of strategy now as other youths spoke of hunting or girls. It was not right, but the world did not ask what was right before it acted. Renly will want something for his help, she said. He will not give his swords away for the pleasure of seeing Lannister blood on them. I know. Robb looked down at the crown on the table, the one the River Lords had hammered out of sword steel, rough and heavy. He picked it up, weighed it in his hands. I will not bend to him. I'd sooner break this thing and go back to being Lord of Winterfell than kneel before another Southerner who thinks my people are a tale told to frighten their children. It is not kneeling if you stand beside him, Catelyn said. If the terms are right. You can keep the North apart and still move with the South when it suits you. She hesitated. And your sisters? He flinched. Arya? Wild and willful. Sansa? Trapped in a golden cage. Every plan she made, every word she spoke, had those faces hovering at the edge of them. If Renly takes the city, he said, he must deal with the Lannisters' hostages. If he holds them, so do I. If we are enemies, he has no reason to spare them. If we are allies, if he is an honorable man, Catelyn finished. I pray he is. Robb set the crown down gently, as if it might shatter. So do I, he said, for all our sakes. Far to the north, where thunder was only the distant crack of ice along a frozen river, Jon Snow's world had narrowed to the ring of wood on wood and the scrape of boots on packed snow. He moved by reflex, sword up, twist, parry, the practice blade jarring his arms with each impact. His breath burned at his lungs, his knuckles raw inside the stiff leather gloves. Across from him, Jax, broad-shouldered, thick, one of the new recruits from down White Lands, grunted as he swung, sweat freezing in his beard. Faster, Snow, called Ser Alliser Thorne, stalking the yard with a frown deep enough to hold Snow. The dead won't take turns so politely, or is it you like the idea of being their first meal? Jon bit down on his answer, let the irritation bleed into his footwork instead. Slash, step, feint. Jax overreached. Jon knocked his blade aside, stepped inside his guard, and rapped him hard on the shoulder. The big man yelped and went down with a crash that sent powder puffing up around him. The yard broke into laughter. Even Alliser's mouth twitched, though he smothered it quickly. Again, he snapped. On your feet, Jax. Snow, don't look so pleased with yourself. You're not half so quick as you think. Jon lowered the practice sword, chest heaving. Samwell Tarly was hugging his cloak to himself near the wall, cheeks pink with cold. He gave Jon a tentative thumbs up that made Jon's mouth quirk despite the ache in his arms. Above, on the wooden gallery that looked down over the yard, Lord Commander Mormont shifted his weight, black cloak stirring in the wind. An old crow watching younger ones learn to fly, Jon thought, or to fall. They drilled until their fingers went numb and the blisters broke under the calluses. When at last Thorne called a halt, Jon's shoulders felt as if they'd been hammered on a forge. He leaned on the practice sword a moment, letting his breath settle. The smell of sweat and old straw, cold iron and men, was as familiar now as the sense of Winterfell had once been. Not bad, Sam said as Jon trudged toward him. You, didn't fall on your face even once. High praise, Jon managed. His throat felt scraped raw. I'll carve it on my tombstone when a wildling finally puts an axe through my skull. I'd rather you didn't have a tombstone at all, Sam said, then rushed on before the words could hang too heavily between them. I mean, we're supposed to burn the dead, right? It's, more practical. Jon huffed something that might have been a laugh. The sky above Castle Black was the dull leaden color that meant more snow before nightfall. The wall loomed behind them, an immense block of dirty white blue that seemed to swallow sound. Out beyond the gates, the haunted forest waited, dark and tangled. There were whispers now of things moving in those woods that were not wildlings or wolves. "Snow!" The shout came from the gate that led into the rear courtyard. Dolorous Ed trotted toward them, shoulders hunched as if warding off some personal rain cloud. "Maester wants you. Says some raven came south that you need to hear." Sam perked up. "From Winterfell?" he asked. "From south of there, I'd wager," Ed said. Raven looked tired enough to drop out of the sky. "Nearly did, if you ask me. Not that anyone asks me, mind you. No one ever says, 'Oh, let's see what Ed thinks.' Unless it's about cleaning the privies." Jon's heart gave a small, traitorous jump. Ravens from the south meant news. Bits and pieces of a world he'd left behind, stitched together by rumor and ink. Often it was little more than lists of petty lords squabbling over petty things, but sometimes, just sometimes, the Black Wings carried something that mattered. He wiped his hands on his cloak as he followed Ed toward the rookery, Sam puffing at his heels. The climb felt steeper than usual, his legs heavy after the morning's work, but some urgency pushed him on. It had been weeks since the last clear word from Robb. Every day of silence felt like another mile widening between them. The rookery was warmer than the yard, but not by much. The heat came less from the brazier in the corner than from the press of feathered bodies, the constant restless shifting of ravens on their perches. The air smelled of guano and seed, old parchment and singed feathers. Maester Aemon stood near one of the cages, head tilted as if listening to something only he could hear. His clouded eyes turned toward the sound of their boots on the stair. "Jon," he said. His voice was thin but clear. "And Samwell. Good. Come closer." Sam had the scrap of parchment in his hand already, fingers careful on the brittle edge. His eyes were wide in his round face. "It came with the morning birds," he whispered as Jon approached. "From the south. From a maester at Riverrun, I think. The seal was broken before it reached us. Must have been opened and copied at Eastwatch. But the words..." Jon took the parchment gently. The ink was cramped, written in a maester's hurried hand, but there was a single line in another script at the top, larger and more forceful. His breath caught as he recognized it. Robb's hand, uneven as it had been when they'd practiced together in the maester's turret at Winterfell, but his all the same. "Brother," it read, "the world roars. Know that I remember you." Below, in the maester's more careful lettering, came the meat of the message. Words to be sent to all the castles of the north. Robb Stark, proclaimed king in the north and Trident. Tywin Lannister driven back. The Riverlands rising. And now, the south in motion as well. Renegade kings and mustered hosts. Renly Baratheon crowned in the Reach with 100,000 men at his back. "King," Jon said under his breath, as if the word might bite him. He stared at the letters until they blurred. "They've named him king." "It seems they have," Maester Aemon said softly. The old man's blind eyes fixed on Jon's face, reading truths there that Jon had not yet spoken. "The wolf has howled, and the other wolves have answered." Jon felt something twist inside his chest. He had known, of course. The rumors had carried that much already. Men on the wall liked to talk. Word filtered up from merchants and rangers alike. Still, seeing it set down, king in the north, made it solid in a way rumors never were. "He writes of Renly too," Sam said, peering over Jon's shoulder. "All these men marching, 100,000. That must be..." It's hard to even imagine that many. Jon could imagine it too well. Lines of armored men stretching from horizon to horizon, banners whipping in a southern breeze, the ground trembling beneath their weight. Against that, what was the thin black line of the Night's Watch at the end of the world? "It is good that the realm remembers the wall," Aemon murmured. "Too often they forget." Jon looked up sharply. "There's mention of us?" Aemon's wrinkled mouth curled faintly. "There is now. I have written back to remind them that while they play at crowns, there is a place where the world grows thin and the dark looks through. Whether they listen." He shook his head. "Kings have little time for old men's warnings. Their ears are full of their own names." Jon lowered his gaze to the parchment again. "Brother, the world roars. Know that I remember you." He could almost hear Robb's voice in those words, could almost see him as he'd been in the yard at Winterfell, hair damp with sweat, wooden sword in hand, laughing as they traded blows. That boy had worn no crown but snow and the regard in their father's eyes. Now the crown was steel and the regard was of hard northern lords who would not forgive weakness. "Do you regret it?" Sam asked quietly. "Ever, I mean, taking the black?" The question hung in the air between them like a raven that might drop talons out at either of them. Aemon's blind gaze turned inward, to memories only he knew. Jon could feel his own regrets like a bruise he'd learned not to press too often. "I knew what I was doing," he said finally. It sounded thin even to his own ears. "I made a choice. Robb made his. We walk the roads set before us." Jeor Mormont listened without interrupting as Jon read the message aloud, then lowered himself back into his chair with a crackle of old joints. The fire in the small hearth was little more than embers now, but the solar was warmer than the tower's other rooms, cluttered with bearskins and old fitments that smelled faintly of smoke and dog. "So the boy's a king now," Mormont grunted when Jon finished. He took a long swallow from his tankard, ale frothing in his gray beard. "World's never short of kings, I found. Queens either. They sprout like mushrooms when the rot sets in." Jon folded the parchment carefully. His fingers wanted to smooth it flat over and over, as if he could press his brother's presence into it. "He broke the Lannisters," he said. He couldn't keep the pride entirely out of his voice. "At Whispering Wood and then again. Took Jaime prisoner. They say even Tywin fears to meet him in the field now." "I've heard," Mormont said. "Every crow that comes from the south brings some new tale of this young wolf and his battles. Men like to talk of victories. They forget what comes after." He snorted. "Your brother may be a good commander. That doesn't mean he'll be a good king, or live long enough to learn how." Jon's jaw tightened. "He's not like Joffrey," he said, "or Renly. He never wanted." "No," Mormont cut in, "but wanting and getting rarely walk hand in hand. The North named him. The Riverlands too, if this is right. Men don't give crowns easily, and they don't take them back without blood." He stared at the fire for a moment, eyes distant. The raven on the back of his chair shifted, claws scraping wood, then gave a sudden harsh croak. "King," it said. "King, king, king." "Aye, you old devil," Mormont muttered. "The world's full of them just now." The words itched under Jon's skin. "If the realm is at war," he said slowly, "if the south is full of thunder and the lions are struck between hammers, if the north stands alone with enemies on every side." He stopped, choking down the rest. The thoughts felt like betrayal even as they formed. Mormont's eyes cut to him, sharp despite the years. "If," he echoed. "No if about it, boy. The realm is at war. Your kin are in the thick of it by the sound. You, on the other hand, are here." Jon swallowed. "We guard the realm," he said. It was the Night's Watch's oldest truth. "From the things beyond the wall." "Just so." Mormont leaned back, the chair creaking. "I've had lads stand in that spot and ask me to let them ride south, to see their sisters married, their fathers buried, their mothers' faces one last time. You know what I told them?" Jon did know. He'd heard the stories, some grumbled in anger, some in bitter acceptance. He said nothing. "I told them the same thing I'll tell you now if you're fool enough to ask." Mormont went on. "The realm had lords before you were born and will have lords when you're dead. There'll always be some bloody war for some bloody crown. But there's only one wall. Only one line between what's out there and everything your brother thinks he's fighting for." He jabbed a finger toward the north-facing wall, as if he could drill through stone to the ice beyond. "You break faith with that, you might as well hand the others a ladder." The word sent a prickle up Jon's spine. Others. Most men said it like they'd say grumpkins or snarks, something for children's tales. Mormont said it like a memory. I wasn't asking to go south, Jon lied. The parchment felt heavy in his hand. I wanted to know if my brother... He's alive, Mormont said, more gently than Jon expected. That's more than I can say for many men's brothers these days. Take the gift as the gods give it and let it lie. He reached out, and Jon handed the parchment over reluctantly. Mormont held it up toward the dim light from the arrow slit, then snorted again. And if he's half as clever as these songs make him, your brother will know well enough that someone must hold the world's edge while he plays at hammer and anvil in the south. Let him hear the thunder. You mind the cold. Jon found his feet carrying him back to the rookery, as if some part of him refused to let the parchment go with the Lord Commander. The tower stones were cold under his hands as he climbed, the narrow stair twisting tighter as it rose. Maester Aemon's cell was tucked just below the rookery itself. The old man sat on his narrow bed, hands folded over his knees, the faint rustle of parchment all around him. A candle burned low on a crate used as a table, its light gilding the whorls of ancient wrinkles. Back so soon? Aemon asked. There was no surprise in his tone. Sit, Jon. Jon sat. The stool creaked under his weight. For a moment he simply listened to the sounds of the tower, the shuffle of ravens above, the sigh of wind through narrow slits, the faint crackle of the candle. They called him king, he said at last. My brother, Robb, king in the north. Yes, Aemon said. He never wanted it, Jon said. He used to joke about it. When I asked what he'd do if he were king, he said he'd make the cook stop boiling the meat twice, and then he'd abdicate to Sansa because she liked singing better than he did. He heard the boy's voice in his memory, bright with laughter. Now they call him your grace and put my father's sword in his hand and expect him to save them. Sometimes, Aemon said softly, men are given crowns when what they need is a cloak. His fingers worried the edge of his sleeve. I know something of that. Jon looked at him sharply. He knew the maester had once been of some great house. Targaryen, the rumors whispered, but he'd never asked the man outright. Felt like prying at an old wound. Tonight, he found himself wanting to. You were offered a crown? He said. Aemon smiled faintly, a ghost of amusement at his own expense. Offered, no. There were men who would have put it on my head if they could. Men who looked at me and saw a name instead of a man. I said no. Others did not. He tilted his blind eyes toward Jon. Do you think that ended the matter? That because I said no once, the world stopped turning its eyes to that name. Jon shook his head without thinking. Aemon nodded. When I came to the wall, the maester went on, I thought I had escaped that game. Up here there are no crowns, only black, only duty, yet still the echoes of it follow me. I hear of kings rising and falling, like waves breaking on a far shore. I cannot touch them, but I feel the pull all the same. He reached out, found Jon's hand without fumbling, and patted it with a dry warmth. You think you have left your family behind, he said. You have not. Their choices will shake the world you stand in, even if you never see them again. Jon swallowed. The words dug under his defenses with disquieting ease. If I had stayed, he said, if I had not taken the black, I might be with him now, fighting, helping, and leaving the wall weaker, Aemon said. Perhaps letting something through that your brother's battles could never stop. Do you think he would thank you for that? Jon thought of Robb's scowl when Bran fell, the fierce way he had clung to the thought of protecting their little brother. No, Robb would want the wall watched. That did not make the choice rest easy. Your path was set the day you spoke your words, Aemon said gently. You may look south, but your feet must stand here. The question is not whether you feel the pull of the world below. It is what you do with that pull. Jon stared at the old man's face, at the deep hollows around his eyes, the fine tremor in his fingers. Aemon had given up whatever claim he might have had to anything more than this narrow room and the ravens above. He had chosen the wall as a refuge and a prison both. "Does it ever stop?" Jon asked. "The wondering?" Aemon's smile turned wistful. "I am 90 and more Jon Snow. My bones ache when the wind turns. My eyes see only ghosts. And still I find myself turning my head when a raven comes from the south, wondering what new madness the dragon's old shadow has cast." He shook his head. "No, it does not stop, but its weight changes. When you are young, it pulls you like a riptide. As you age, it becomes something else, a memory you carry in your pocket, heavy, but familiar." He squeezed Jon's hand once more, then let go. "Go back to your brothers," he said. "Train. Watch. When the time comes that your choices matter most, you will not be thinking of crowns. You will be thinking of the men beside you, and of the cold blowing in your face. That is enough." Morning came hard and cold, the sky a pewter bowl overhead. The camp that had seemed sprawling the night before folded in on itself with ruthless efficiency. Tents came down, ropes were coiled, carts loaded. Fires were kicked out, leaving circles of blackened mud. Men checked straps and buckles, cinched girths on steaming horses, slung spears and shields. The sound of it was like a drumbeat. Hoofbeats shouted orders, the clatter of iron, the low rumble of thousands of voices. The Great Jon's booming laugh carried over it all as he stalked through his men, cuffing one here, clapping another on the shoulder, promising glory and plunder in equal measure. Roose Bolton's host formed in more eerie quiet, their flayed man banners stirring like long tongues. Robb sat his horse near the vanguard, cloak drawn tight against the biting air. Gray wind ghosted beside the destrier's flank, weaving in and out of the legs of horses, raising no alarm. Men made the sign of the old gods as the direwolf passed, some in reverence, some in fear. Catelyn rode a little behind her son, close enough to see the set of his shoulders, the way his head lifted when he looked south. Her own mount was a steady riverbred mare, more suited to long days in the saddle than to the crashing violence of battle. She had not ridden in such a company since Robert's rebellion, and the echo of that memory rode with her now. Different banners, different faces, the same sense of the world teetering on the edge of something that would decide a generation. The trumpets sounded at last, short, sharp blasts that cut through the murmur of the army. The column began to move. They crossed the river first, over a pontoon bridge that swayed and creaked under the weight of so many hooves and wheels. The water below was dark and swift. Catelyn watched it slide past and thought of the river she'd stood beside the night before. All rivers ran to the sea in the end. All blood did too. On the far bank, the ground rose gently into rolling fields, patchy with frost-killed stubble. Farmers had once plowed these lands. Now only boot prints marred the earth. Smoke from distant burned holdings smudged the horizon, a faint, dirty smear. Robb raised his hand, and the column slowed enough that he could look over at the men he left behind. Roose Bolton's host remained on the near bank, ranks still, faces turned toward him. The Great Jon stood by their banners, one massive hand resting on the direwolf staff he'd taken up in Robb's name, the other raised in salute. "Hold them," Robb called across the roar of the river. "Hold the fords, hold Harrenhal, hold the North's line. Make the lions fear every step they take." The Great Jon's answering roar was wordless but fierce. Bolton only inclined his head, pale eyes flat, as if he were appraising a stranger in a market. Catelyn watched the exchange with a knot in her gut. Trust was a kind of gamble, she supposed. All alliances were, and she had argued with Robb long enough over which men to leave where. In the end, there had been no perfect answer, only choices that left her sleepless. The column picked up speed once more. They rode south. Behind them, the banners on the near shore snapped in the wind. Ahead, the empty road unrolled, a brown-gray ribbon cutting through the land. Somewhere far beyond the horizon lay Bitterbridge and the thunder of Renly Baratheon's host. Somewhere farther still, King's Landing, where Lannisters sat a stolen throne and her daughters were either hostages or corpses. Robb did not look back again. His whole body leaned forward in the saddle, as if he could will the distance to shorten by force of determination alone. Gray wind loped easily beside him, tongue lolling, pausing now and then to sniff the air. The wolf's ears pricked toward the south, as if he too heard some distant beating heart. The world roared as Robb had written. The wolves were riding toward the sound. They saw the southern camp before they saw the bridge itself. At first it was only a smudge against the pale sky, a smear of color on the horizon. As the day climbed, it resolved into something larger and stranger. Tents upon tents upon tents, bright as a tourney ground and twice as many, banners like a field of painted spears, smoke from 100 cookfires rising in twisting gray columns. Catelyn Stark had stood before armies before, but this was something else. Renly Baratheon's host did not huddle like a war camp around some choke point or hill. It sprawled along both banks of the Mander in lazy confidence, spreading across the fields like spilled wine. A city, she thought. A city with no walls but its own numbers. Beside her, Robb reigned in just beyond the crest of the last low rise. The wind picked at his hair, tugged at his cloak. His face gave nothing away, but she saw his fingers tighten briefly on the reins. That many? Theon Greyjoy breathed, riding up on Robb's other side. His dark hair was pulled back in a leather thong, his marten cloak askew. 7 hells. My father would drown himself in a barrel of salt if he could muster half as many. The northern column slowed behind them, ranks rippling. Men shaded their eyes to stare downhill. The wind carried up snatches of distant noise. The clatter of harness, the shout of far-off orders, the bray of horns. Beneath it all ran a low, steady hum like the sea in a shell, the sound of thousands of men at their daily business. They're spread out too far, Ricard Karstark muttered grimly, squinting. Makes them look more than they are. The Blackfish counted tents, Catelyn said, not just banners. He is not a man given to exaggeration. Maybe he miscounted on purpose, Theon said, half jesting, half hoping. Robb said nothing. He sat there for a long moment, weighing the sight with those gray eyes that had once looked up at her for comfort and now studied battlefields. Gray wind crept up beside his horse, fur ruffling in the breeze, and let out a soft, uncertain whine. Even the direwolf seemed taken aback by the enormity of the camp below. The lions will have to grow wings if they mean to fly over that, the great Jon said, cantering up with his horse already lathered. He grinned, all teeth and beard. Take heart, boy. If Renly Baratheon's half as foolish as he is pretty, we'll have half those swords fighting for us before the fortnight's out. Or against us, Roose Bolton added quietly from the rear, pale eyes unreadable. His men sat their horses with eerie calm, as if they rode to a harvest instead of a parley. Robb finally drew a breath. We're close enough, he said. No sense in giving them the sight of us gawping like boys at a mummer's show. Horns. The northern horns took up the call, low and mournful, rolling down the slope ahead of them. From below, different horns answered, brighter, trilling in rising patterns that felt almost like music. Banners turned toward them. Movement rippled through the southern host like wind in high grass. Remember, Catelyn said, leaning closer to her son, you ride as a king, but you also ride seeking peace of a sort. Pride is a bad saddle horse for talks like these. It will throw you the first time someone tugs at the reins. He shot her a swift look, half exasperation, half gratitude. You'll be there to cuff me if I forget, he said. I will, she promised. They rode down into the valley as the sun climbed higher, and the encampment grew around them like a forest of silk and steel. The air changed as they entered the edges of the southern camp. The clean, sharp smell of frost and distant rain that had followed them from the Trident gave way to heavier scents. Roast meat and baked bread, horse sweat and trampled grass, the perfume of some sweet herb someone had scattered near a lavish pavilion. Pavilions rose on either side of the earthen track, some plain canvas with only a banner to mark allegiance, others ridiculously elaborate, striped or patterned. Their guy ropes hung with little bells or charms. House Tyrell's golden rose was everywhere, on banners, on shields, even stitched into the hems of some men's cloaks. The crowned stag of Baratheon rippled high above it all, defiantly bright. Soldiers turned to stare as the Northerners passed. They were cleaner than most of Robb's men, sheathed in shining plate over green or blue surcoats, helms polished to mirror brightness. Some stood in knots around dice games, others lounged with meat or bread in their hands. One group drilled in the nearer field, lances couched as they thundered at straw dummies. Their horses were sleek and well-fed, manes combed. "Soft," Stark muttered under his breath. "We'll see how bright that steel stays once it's had a taste of real mud." "Say that a little louder, old man," Theon murmured. "I don't think the 10,000 knights within earshot quite heard you." A few of the Southerners made hurried signs of the seven when they caught sight of Grey Wind. Others simply gaped or leaped out of the wolf's path, muttering. One young knight in gilded armor let out an oath and nearly dropped his helm, much to the amusement of his comrades. "They look at us like we're the savages at some Essosi menagerie," murmured Lord Jason Mallister at Catelyn's side. "Let them," Catelyn said. "Savage beasts are not easily tamed." They passed a great cookfire where whole sides of beef turned on spits, fat spitting into the flames. Farther on, a knot of singers plucked at lutes and harps, their voices weaving a melody that Jon would have recognized from Winterfell. A southern song, brought north by some traveling bard years ago. The familiarity of it stung. At last, they came to the heart of the encampment. A vast green pavilion stood there, its silk walls embroidered with golden antlers and roses twined together. Before it rose a carved wooden seat that was not quite a throne and not quite a chair. Something between, Catelyn thought. A gilded stag's head mounted above it, antlers spread wide. A small honor guard waited there, already arrayed. At their head stood a young man Catelyn knew at once, though she had not seen him since he was little more than a boy at Storm's End. Renly Baratheon wore a golden half-cape over deep green, his black hair curling over his brow, his beard neatly kept. A heavy circlet of gold worked in the shape of antlers rested on his head as if it belonged there and always had. At his side was a woman in pale blue and white silk, her hair the rich brown of chestnuts, her face open and composed. Margaery Tyrell, Catelyn realized. And behind them, towering above the others in mismatched armor and a plain blue cloak, stood a woman like a walking bastion. Brienne of Tarth, if the rumors were true, her great sword strapped across her back. "This is it," Robb said quietly. His fingers tightened once on the reins, then loosened. He nudged his horse forward. Robb swung down from the saddle in one smooth motion and strode forward, Grey Wind padding at his flank. For a heartbeat, Catelyn's breath caught. Some part of her expected the southern guards to react as northern men would, with hands snatching at sword hilts. But Renly's men had seen stranger things in their time around this bright king. It seemed, or else their discipline was better than she gave them credit for. Swords stayed sheathed. Renly stepped down from his seat to meet them halfway. The gesture was deliberate, and Catelyn felt some of her tension ease. Kings who stayed on thrones and made others look up to them were often the ones whose pride outweighed their sense. "Your Grace," Robb said. His voice carried clearly over the murmuring crowd. He did not bow. Renly's smile flickered, then steadied. "Your Grace," he replied, inclining his head. "Welcome to Bitterbridge, King in the North. You've brought winter's breath with you." His gaze slid past Robb to Catelyn, and his expression softened. "Lady Stark, it has been too long." "Your Grace," she answered. "You have grown since I last saw you, but you have your brother's smile still." "Robert's smile won him more than one kingdom," Renly said lightly. "I trust it may help me keep this one." He extended an arm toward the woman at his side. "May I present my queen, Margaery of House Tyrell?" Margaery stepped forward, dipping in a graceful curtsy that made the beads on her bodice catch the light like dew. "Lady Stark," she said, "we have heard much of your courage. It is an honor to meet the mother of the king in the north." Her voice was warm, her eyes direct and appraising. Catelyn marked the phrasing. Not traitor, not rebel, not pretender. King. That, at least, they gave them in words. "You honor us with your welcome," Catelyn said. "The North remembers those who treat it fairly." A small rippling murmur ran through the assembled Reach lords at that. The phrase meant little to them, perhaps, but they recognized the conviction in it. Margaery's smile deepened a fraction. "And this is Brienne of Tarth," Renly said, gesturing to the towering woman behind him. "My sworn sword." Brienne gave a short, awkward bow, gauntlet hand thumping her breastplate. Her eyes flicked over Robb, Catelyn, Grey Wind, and all the northern men beyond, sharp and assessing. There was no derision there, only wary respect. "We have much to speak of," Renly went on, "but not standing in the dust like merchants haggling over sacks of grain. Come, we've prepared a tent for you, King Robb, Lady Stark. Rest your men. This afternoon we can sit together and decide how best to shear the lions." Laughter rippled. Robb's mouth twitched wryly. "I prefer flaying to shearing when it comes to lions," he said. "But we can debate methods over a map. You see?" Renly said to those around him, as if they were all friends at a feast. "The North has a sense of humor after all. I told you they must, or how else could they bear all that snow?" Catelyn let herself breathe again. The skirmish of words was a dance she knew. Pride was pricked but not mortally wounded. Respect paid but not begged. It was a beginning. The tent they were given was smaller than Renly's grand pavilion but larger than most homes Catelyn had seen in the north. The rugs on the floor were thick and soft, the cushions scattered about overstuffed, the wine in the flagon on the table a deep, dark red that smelled of summer. Robb ignored the wine. He stood over the map some Tyrell scribe had drawn, brow furrowed. Catelyn watched him trace the lines of the Rose Road with one calloused finger, then the sweep of the Blackwater Rush, the inked mark that was King's Landing. "They're closer than I thought," he said. "A week's hard ride, with so many men? Less if they push." "Their horses are fresher than ours," Karstark said, "and they haven't had Tywin gnawing at their flanks for months. It changes a host." Roose Bolton regarded the map like a piece of meat he intended to carve. "They have more to lose in a fight on open ground, too," he observed. "Heavy cavalry, soft-footed levies. We can bleed them badly if it comes to that. Making war on those we hope to call our allies is a poor start," Catelyn said sharply. "Put away your knives, Lord Bolton. We came here to see whether they might be turned to better use." "As you say, my lady," Roose replied, his tone mild. His eyes remained on the map. "It is always prudent to know where to cut, in case the alliance sours." Theon poured himself a generous cup of wine and flopped onto a cushion. "If you're going to share a bed with a man, you should at least know where his ribs are," he remarked, "in case you wake one night with a knife in yours." "Your wisdom astounds me daily," Robb said dryly. Then he sighed and straightened, pushing his hair back from his face. "They could break Tywin in the field if they chose. If we strike together, if we catch him between us before he scuttles back to the rock." Catelyn moved closer, laying her hand briefly on his arm. "First they must choose to be your allies," she reminded him. 100,000 swords will not leap to your banner because you ask politely. Renly Baratheon will want assurances. So will House Tyrell. "He'll have them," Robb said, "up to a point." "And beyond that point?" Karstark asked. "What if his price is the North? Then he can ride his green banners into lion claws without us," Robb said. There was a flash of Ned in his voice then, a sudden cold finality. "I will not trade one tyrant for another." Catelyn thought of how Renly had stepped down from his chair, of his easy smile and the way the Tyrell bannermen watched him as men watched a favored son. He was no Joffrey, petulant and cruel, thin as a sword blade and twice as brittle. But he was a Baratheon still, Robert's brother, and Robert had laughed as he killed. "I will speak with him first," she said. "He remembers me. We met at Storm's End when I carried messages for your father. I can remind him of the North's honor, the Riverland's suffering. Paint him a picture of what the realm might be if Lannister gold were no longer laid over every crack." "Be careful how brightly you paint it," Roose murmured. "Men who see their own glory in a mirror are hard to turn from it." Catelyn met his gaze. I have lived with proud men all my life, my lord, she said. I know how to speak to them. She thought of Ned and Robert under the walls of the Trident, blood-splashed and young, shouting victory. Pride had not saved either of them in the end. Perhaps she could make that lesson serve them now. Renly sent for her before the sun had fully begun its slide toward the west. The messenger bowed low at the entrance to their tent, cloak muddy from his hurry. His Grace asks that you join him for a quiet word, my lady, he said. Robb wanted to come, of course, so did half his lords. Catelyn shook her head at them all. Later, she said. He has invited me. We'll gain more with his guard down. He has 100,000 swords, Stark muttered. His guard will never be down. She went alone, save for 2 of Robb's own sworn men at a discreet distance. The path to Renly's pavilion wound through a maze of tents and cookfires. Men laughed, gambled, sharpened swords. A few glanced up at her, most did not. Her presence was a ripple in their day, quickly smoothed. Inside the great green tent, the air was cooler than she expected. Scented oil burned in small lamps, cutting the smell of men and leather. The silk walls turned the outside light to a soft, perpetual dusk. Banners hung from the central pole in tiers. The crowned stag, the lordly rose, the dour sigils of Stormland's houses. Renly sat at a table with a plate of cheese and a loaf of dark bread between them, as if they were 2 minor lords sharing a humble supper. He wore no crown now, only a simple leather jerkin over his green tunic. Brienne of Tarth stood behind him like his shadow, her broad face expressionless. Lady Stark, Renly said, rising, I hope your accommodations are comfortable? My southern lords are more used to featherbeds than bedrolls. They grow fussy if the straw is not packed just so. They are more than sufficient, your grace, she said, inclining her head. I have slept in worse. On campaign with Ned, no doubt, Renly said. He gestured for her to sit, then broke the bread himself, tearing off a chunk and offering it across the table. I remember you, at Storm's End. You were younger, but your eyes were just as sharp. You were a boy with scraped knees and jam on your tunic, Catelyn said as she accepted the bread. You followed Robert everywhere, even when he went to the training yard against your mother's orders. Renly laughed aloud at that, the sound rich and genuine. You see, you remember me too. That's good. It means we can speak plainly. Plain speech had gotten her in as much trouble as it had ever saved her, but she nodded. Plainly, then, you sit here with a host that could decide the fate of the realm. My son rides with a fraction of that strength, but he has broken Lannister armies that thought themselves unbreakable. Between you could crush Tywin Lannister and pull down the false king on the Iron Throne. Renly chewed slowly, considering her over his bread. You waste no time, my lady. Time is one thing we have little of, she said. Every day sees more dead. Every raven carries news of another village burned, another lordling raising his own standard. The realm is tearing itself apart while the Lannisters sit and gorge themselves. And the Starks? Renly asked mildly. You speak as if you stand aside from the tearing, but your son has claimed a crown as boldly as I have. King in the north, king in the south. How many kingdoms shall we have before we admit that we've cut the realm into too many pieces to mend? We did not start this, Catelyn said, heat creeping into her voice despite herself. The North asked for justice. Joffrey Baratheon answered with my husband's head. Renly's expression sobered. He said quietly, I saw it, not with my own eyes, but in the reports my man brought back. A boy king, drunk on power, swinging a sword he barely knows how to hold. Cersei and her father whispering at each ear. He set his bread down. I did not call myself king because I wanted to play at crowns, Lady Stark. Stannis has his claim by blood, but he has never had the people. I do. Men love me. They will follow me. With House Tyrell at my back, I can make the realm something more than a butcher's yard. And what of the North? Catelyn asked softly. What of the Riverlands? Will they be something more than another field to feed your armies? Brienne shifted slightly behind Renly, as if she would have liked to speak but knew her place. Renly leaned back, studying Catelyn in the lamplight. You want freedom, he said. Your lords shouted for it under your son's banner. I've heard the tales. King in the north, they call him. Tell me true. Do you seek a new age where the north stands apart forever? Or do you seek safety for your children and justice for your dead? She thought of Winterfell's godswood, the heart tree's red leaves whispering, of little Rickon, who might never remember his father's voice clearly, of Sansa and Arya in King's Landing, if they still lived. Both, she said, if we can have them. If not, I will settle for my children being allowed to grow to adulthood. Renly's mouth tightened. Cersei will not give up hostages easily, he said. But she'll have no choice if we take her city, if we break her father. And my son can help you do that, Catelyn pressed. He holds Jaime Lannister. He holds the Riverlands in the crook of his elbow. Tywin cannot move freely while Robb's outriders prowl his flanks. With your strength and his cunning, the lions can be broken. Together, Renly drummed his fingers on the table. The sound was soft but insistent. And in return, he asked, what do the wolves ask of the stag? She let herself breathe once, deeply. Recognition, she said, of the North's right to rule itself, of my son as king in the North and overlord of the Trident. No Southron lord shall have claim on our lands again. Our men will not be called to die in southern quarrels unless we choose it. In all else, we will be your ally. When the lions roar, we will be there to answer. When your enemies march, we will choose whether to stand beside you. But we will not kneel. Brienne's brows shot up. Renly's eyes widened just a fraction, then narrowed. You ask much, he said. I ask what the North has bled for, Catelyn replied. What my son's men shouted for as they raised him on their shoulders. If you offer less, you offer war. Silence fell. The candle sputtered, wax running down its side. Outside, the camp noise went on. A man laughing, a horse whickering, a hammer ringing against metal. It all seemed very far away, as if the world had narrowed to this one table and the men and women at it. At last, Renly smiled again. It was slower this time, more thoughtful. You've grown fiercer since Storm's End, my lady, he said. I suppose war does that. Very well. Let us say I grant your son his northern crown. Let us say I call him friend and ally, and share this realm with him rather than demand it all. What guarantees do I have that he will not turn that friendship into a knife at my back once the lions are dead? You have my word that he is not that man, Catelyn said. And you have something else, his need. The North is rich in stone and wood and brave men, but poor in grain. Our harvests are shorter. We will need your Southron fields to feed all the mouths that war will leave behind. We cannot afford to quarrel with those who grow wheat. You cannot afford to anger those who guard your northern border. Renly's gaze flicked up to Brienne. Some silent exchange passed between them. Then he looked back at Catelyn. Very well, he said. I will consider your proposal. And I will speak with your son, king to king, before the sun sets tomorrow. We'll see whether our hammers can strike the same anvil without shattering it. That evening there was a feast, of course. Catelyn had expected it. Southern lords seemed to require feasts as they required food or sleep. The Tyrells especially had a knack for turning even the most practical gathering into a display. The feasting pavilion was open on 3 sides, its silk roof supported by carved poles. Torches ringed the space, their light painting everything in shades of amber and crimson. Tables groaned under the weight of dishes. Roast boar glazed in honey, river fish stuffed with herbs, wheels of cheese, towers of sugared fruits. Musicians sat on a raised platform, plucking at lutes and harps, drums keeping a gentle heartbeat beneath it all. Robb entered with his principal lords, Karstark, Bolton, Mal Lister, the Great Jon, moving as one knot of gray amid all the color. Heads turned, conversations dipped. Catelyn saw more than one hand twitch toward a goblet stem rather than a sword. These men were not expecting violence here, not tonight. Most seemed curious, a few wary, a handful plainly resentful at sharing their king's attention. Renly rose from his central seat when he saw them, raising a cup. "My lords," he called out, his voice cutting through the noise without strain. "Welcome our guests from the far north. Wolves at our table, not at our throats. For tonight, at least." Scattered laughter, some of it genuine, some edged. Margaery Tyrell sat at his right hand, her hair coiled like a crown about her head. On his left, Loras Tyrell, the Knight of Flowers, watched Robb with narrowed eyes as sharp and polished as the steel at his hip. Catelyn took her place a little way down the main table, close enough to see and hear but not to lead the conversation. That was as she wished it. Her work for now was done. She had planted seeds in Renly's mind. Tomorrow they would see what kind of tree he meant to grow. Robb sat opposite Renly, his posture straight but not stiff. He accepted the wine offered but did not drink deeply. Gray wind lay beneath the table at his boot, only the occasional flick of a white-tipped ear betraying his presence. "How find you our southern hospitality, Your Grace?" Margaery asked once the first wave of platters had been served. Her tone was light, eyes bright. "Very fat," the great Jon boomed before Robb could answer, tearing into a haunch of meat with relish. "If this is how you feed your men, no wonder they ride such fine horses. I turn my cloak myself to get a taste of this every night." Margaery laughed, a clear, pleasing sound. "We do our best to keep men happy," she said. "Happy men fight better. So my grandmother says, and she is seldom wrong." Robb smiled faintly. "In the north, we say hungry men fight harder," he said. "But they die faster too. Perhaps you and my lords can teach each other a balance." Loras Tyrell's gaze slid to the direwolf under the table, then back to Robb. "You bring a beast to table with you," he remarked, voice cool. "Does he eat from your plate as well?" "He eats what I do," Robb said, unruffled. "He's seen more battle than most knights. I won't leave him tied in the mud while I drink wine under silk." A faint, derisive sound escaped Loras, quickly smoothed away. "We all have our attachments," he said. Renly, sensing the tension, lifted his cup again. "To attachments, then," he declared. "To the things we fight for, brothers, wives, sons, crowns. May they be worth the blood we spill." Catelyn drank to that, though the wine tasted sourer now. Attachments could be chains as much as anchors. Her children were scattered like seeds in a storm, each at the mercy of winds she could not command. Soft conversation rose around her. Lord Randyll Tarly spoke sternly of supply lines. Mace Tyrell boasted of the size of his levies until even his own bannermen rolled their eyes. The Northerners spoke little, watchful. They were men more comfortable around a cookfire than a dais. As the night wore on, she slipped away. There would be songs and boasts and perhaps an attempt to drag half the hall into some foolish dance. She had no patience for it. Outside, the air struck her like a blessing, cool and carrying the faint scent of the river. From somewhere nearby came the muted ring of steel, a pair of men at practice in the dark, or perhaps some knight too restless for sleep. Farther off, an owl hooted. The camp's murmurs spread under the vast, indifferent sky, as insubstantial as smoke. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow they would sit over maps and carve lines through the realm, deciding where men would live and where they would die. Tonight was only prelude. The next morning broke pale and cold. A thin mist clung to the low ground near the river, turning the world to blurred smudges until the sun began to burn it off. In the heart of the camp, though there was already heat, in the forge smells, in the chatter of men, in the cluster of high-born tempers gathered under one silk roof, the strategy tent was smaller than the feasting pavilion but more serious. Its walls were plain, its furnishings sparse. A central table, stools, a brazier in the corner, a side table with pitchers of water and wine. The map laid out between them was more detailed than any Catelyn had seen, each river and village carefully inked, each road a hair-fine line. Renly and Robb stood across from each other, the table between them. neither wore a crown. Renly had chosen a dark doublet today, the only sign of his rank a stag brooch at his shoulder. Robb wore plain leather over chain, his only ornament the direwolf clasp at his throat. "We are agreed at least on the nature of the problem," Renly said, tapping King's Landing with 2 fingers. "The lions hold the city. My brother sits inside it wearing a crown that should be mine. And my sisters may be there," Robb said, his jaw tightened, "or their bodies, though I have not yet given up hope." Margaery Tyrell's eyes softened at that. "The last reports from our people in the city still spoke of 2 Stark girls in the Red Keep," she said. "We have ears of a sort in many places. They will not be safe while Cersei Lannister draws breath. But they live. Then we take the city before she decides to make a show of killing them," the great Jon rumbled. "What more is there to say?" "Much," Roose Bolton murmured. "Not least how." Loras gestured at the map. "We march straight up the Rose Road," he said. "Our knights at the fore, pikes behind. We break whatever paltry force they can muster in the field and then throw their heads over the walls. With 100,000 men at our backs and the north at our side, what can they present that will stand?" "Tywin Lannister," Robb said. "Even broken, he's not a foe to ignore. If we leave him at our rear, he can strike like a boar once we're in too deep to pull out. He'll march by the Gold Road, or through the Riverlands if he can. He's half mad with pride and half with fear, but he still knows how to pick his ground." Renly nodded. "We've had word he withdrew to Harrenhal," he said. "But men that proud do not sit behind black stone forever, licking their wounds. Not while their grandson wears a crown they paid so much gold to forge." "Then you need a hammer on each side of him," the great Jon said. He jabbed a thick finger first at the south of the map, then the north. "You bring your pretty knights up the Rose Road. Young Wolf here brings his pack through the Riverlands, keeping to ground he knows. When Tywin comes skulking out, he finds himself between teeth." "A pincer," Margaery said. "My grandmother spoke of such a maneuver once, when she was lecturing my father on turnips and field rotations. 2 men pulling from either side can uproot more than one alone. It's more complicated with armies than vegetables," Roose observed, but he inclined his head. "The notion is sound." Renly studied Robb's face. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we do it together. If either of us falters, the other is exposed. So I must ask plainly, will your lords accept this? Can you put aside whatever songs they're already composing about the North standing alone, to march under a Southron sky alongside strangers?" All eyes turned to Robb then. Catelyn saw the weight of the moment settle on him. His shoulders seemed to draw in, just a fraction, and then firm again. "My men swore to follow me," he said. "They want justice more than they want songs. If this is how we break the Lannisters, they will march. On one condition." He met Renly's gaze without flinching. "That you recognize what my mother asked for, the North and the Trident under my rule. Free of Southron overlords. Allies, not subjects." Silence again. Loras's mouth flattened. Roose's eyes flicked, just once, to Catelyn's face. Renly let out a long breath, as if he were releasing something he had been holding tight. "You ask me to give away half a realm I have not yet taken," he said. "To be king of less than my forebears claimed, with fewer banners in my hall and fewer fields paying me homage." Mace Tyrell, hovering near the back like an overripe fruit, began to puff up. "Your Grace cannot seriously entertain." Margaery laid a light hand on her father's arm. "Hush," she murmured. "Let your king speak." Renly's eyes went briefly to his queen, then back to Robb. "The truth is," he said, "a half-realm held firmly is worth more than a whole realm constantly slipping through your fingers. If I claim the North and you reject me, I gain nothing but another war. If I honor your lord's choice and treat with you as an equal, I gain a friend with wolves at his back." He looked down at the map again, tracing the line of the neck with one finger. "My brother Robert never understood that," he mused. "He thought a crown meant everyone kneeling at once, because they loved him or feared him, and when they did not, he drank the discomfort away. Mean to be more deliberate. Catelyn felt something unclench in her chest. She had not realized until that moment how tightly she had been wound. "Then," she prompted gently. Renly straightened. "Then here is my offer," he said. "I, Renly of House Baratheon, first of my name, King of the Undulls and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm." 6. Robb cut in. His tone was not mocking, only precise. Renly's smile flashed. "6, then," he amended. "I will recognize Robb Stark as king in the north and overlord of the Trident. His lands and lords shall owe no fealty to me. In return, he swears to stand beside me as ally in this war until the Lannisters are broken and Joffrey dethroned. We will divide any spoils taken from House Lannister, castles, mines, coin, according to a fair accounting." He extended his hand across the table. "Do we have an understanding, Your Grace?" Robb looked at the proffered hand, at the map, at his own lords. The Great Jon gave a single sharp nod. Karstark's face was granite, but he did not speak against it. Roose Bolton was unreadable as ever. Robb reached out and clasped Renly's wrist. "We do," he said. The clasp of their hands was firm, but not crushing. Robb's glove was rough leather, the stitching plainly visible where someone had mended a split seam. Renly's wrist was bare, the skin just beginning to chafe where his bracers usually sat. Their grips locked over the inked lines of the Blackwater Rush. Catelyn watched the tension play across their faces. Robb's careful control, Renly's faint, wry amusement. This was not friendship, not yet, but it was something more than enmity. "So it is done," Renly said, releasing Robb's wrist. "We'll have the maesters draft proper terms, of course, but the heart of it is here. The realm will have 2 kings and a common enemy." "And what of Stannis?" Loras asked sharply. "Your brother will not be content to sit on Dragonstone while we divide up the realm like a pie." Renly's jaw tightened. "Stannis made his choices," he said. "Let him stew in his righteousness. If he comes against us now, he comes against more swords than he can count. And if he chooses instead to march on King's Landing, well, he can bleed the lions for us before we arrive." There was a mean practicality in that Catelyn did not entirely like, but she held her tongue. War rarely left room for finer feelings. Margaery reached out and smoothed a wrinkle from the edge of the map, her fingers delicate. "We should plan the details at once," she said. "The timing of marches, the points where our hosts will signal each other. The more we leave to chance, the more space we give Tywin Lannister to slip between our fingers." Roose inclined his head in agreement. "My scouts can harry any Lannister movement in the Riverlands," he offered. "Keep his foragers too busy watching the trees to look at the sky. And my knights can ride ahead on the Rose Road," Loras said, leaning over the map. "We'll drive any lion banners we see straight back into their holes." Catelyn let the talk wash over her for a moment. Details, tactics, all the 1,000 small stones that made up a campaign. The shape of things was set now. The men could worry at how to fit it together like the teeth of a puzzle. She felt a hand touch her sleeve lightly. Margaery had moved closer without her noticing. "Walk with me, Lady Stark," the young queen murmured. "Let the men count rations and arrows. We have other coin to reckon." The noise of the camp dimmed as they walked down toward the river. The Mander here was broad and slow, its surface a green mirror broken only by the occasional ripple where a fish kissed the air. On the far bank, more tents rose, smaller and sparser, the outskirts of Renly's vast sprawl. Margaery moved with practiced grace, careful not to let her hem drag in the damp earth. Catelyn's stride was shorter, more practical. Her boots were made for travel, not display. The 2 women might have been from different worlds, but the wind did not care. It tugged at their cloaks alike. "Your son is impressive," Margaery said after a moment. "You must know that." "I know he carries more than any boy his age should," Catelyn replied. "Impressive or no." Margaery smiled, but there was steel behind it. "All kings carry more than they should," she said. My husband bears the weight lightly, but it is weight all the same. That is why they need wives, mothers, women who can see the cracks they will not admit to. You speak plainly for a queen, Catelyn observed. I find men underestimate me more swiftly that way, Margaery said. They hear a woman speak boldly and decide she must be foolish. It gives me room to move. She glanced sidelong at Catelyn. You, on the other hand, they will suspect at once. You have the look of someone who has kept a house standing when the men inside it thought it would fall. Catelyn huffed a soft, surprised laugh. You sound older than you look, Your Grace. I grew up in High Garden, Margaery said. The roses there have thorns, and they are not shy about using them. My grandmother taught me that if you would feed a garden, you must know what to prune as well as what to water. She paused. Tell me truthfully, Lady Stark, will your son keep this pact? The North keeps its word, Catelyn said, stung. We are not in the habit of swearing oaths we intend to break. I meant no slight, Margaery said quickly, but I have seen oaths bend in the wind before. Men who meant what they said when they said it, and then found that the world was not what they expected. She looked out over the river, her face suddenly younger, more vulnerable. I am tying my house to two kings at once now, to two men whose fates are wrapped up in each other. I would like to know that the knots will hold long enough for something to come of it besides graves. Catelyn followed her gaze. Across the water, a flock of birds rose from the reeds, startled by some invisible threat, then settled again. Robb will keep his word as long as he can, she said slowly. He is not a man given to easy betrayal. If this pact breaks, it will be because the world broke first. And Renly? Margaery asked, voice very soft. Do you think he will keep it? Catelyn could hear in that question not just a queen's calculation, but a wife's quieter fear. She thought of Renly's laughter, of the way his men watched him, of the quick glance he'd exchanged with Loras when Stannis's name was mentioned. I think he wants to, she said at last. I think he knows he cannot hold all of this alone. Whether he will remember that when the songs start and the cheering grows loud. She let the thought hang. Margaery nodded, as if that matched her own assessment. Then we must help them remember, she said. You from the North, I from his side. Perhaps, between us, we can keep their pride from eating them alive. You speak of them as if they were two boys about to squabble over a toy, Catelyn said, but there was no heat in it. In some ways they are, Margaery replied. Boys with crowns are the most dangerous kind. They think the game is theirs alone. They forget the pieces they move are other men's lives. They walked in silence for a few paces. The river murmured. Somewhere up the slope, a trumpet sounded, calling men to drill. You have children, Lady Stark, Margaery said after a while. More than your son, the king. Catelyn's throat tightened. I do, she said. For living. 2 girls in the south, 1 boy at the wall, 1 little boy at home. Rickon's face rose in her mind's eye, fierce and small. Bran's, pale and still in his sickbed. Jon's, shut to her more often than not. Once, I thought their greatest concerns would be scraped knees and bruises from falling off horses. Now I pray each day that none of them end with a knife at their throat. Margaery slipped her arm through Catelyn's, a gesture so unexpected Catelyn almost flinched. Then we have this in common, at least, the younger woman said softly. I have no children yet, but I will. And I would like them to grow up in a realm where their father is not forever at war with half the map. Catelyn let herself lean into the touch for a heartbeat. Then let us see if we can build it, she said. Before the world decides otherwise. By late afternoon, ink joined steel as one more weapon on the field. The maesters had set up their horn ink pots and sharpened their quills, parchment unfurled across the end of the war table. Their flickering candles added a waxy tang to the air, overlaying sweat and leather. Renly paced as he dictated, words coming easily. To all lords, high and low, sworn to crown and realm, he began. Let it be known that we, Renly of House Baratheon and Robb of House Stark, enter into solemn covenant. Robb spoke less, but when he did he was precise. "Name the neck," he said. "Make it plain that no southern levy will cross it without the north's leave. And the rivers spell out their lord's rights. The phrase will cling to any ambiguity like leeches." Catelyn's ears pricked at every corner phrase. "Not subject to the Iron Throne," she interjected at one point. "Those words exactly. No save in times of common peril, or except when contentions arise. You know how quickly a clever man can drive a cart through such gaps." The maester, a soft-shouldered reachman with ink-stained fingers, nodded dutifully and scratched out a line, replacing it. Catelyn checked the new wording with a practiced eye. She had played this game before in smaller ways: marriage contracts, land disputes, the quiet, necessary paperwork of a great house. The stakes were larger now, but the principles were the same. Margaery added her voice now and then, smoothing edges. "Say friendship as well as alliance," she suggested. "Men are more easily bound by what they hope to feel than by what they know they must do. It makes breaking the bond seem like a betrayal of themselves, not merely of ink." Roose Bolton watched it all with that faint, impassive interest of his. The great Jon grew bored quickly and started tossing nuts at a passing scullion. Karstark paced, muttering under his breath. At last it was done. The maesters sanded the ink, rolling the parchments carefully. 2 great scrolls remained on the table, glowing faintly in the candlelight. The terms were not perfect, no pact ever was. There were loopholes, places where future men might argue over commas and clauses. But the core of it stood. 2 kings, equal in name, united in purpose against the Lannisters. "Seals," Renly said. "Fetch the seals." They chose to seal the pact under the open sky. It was a small thing, but Catelyn approved. Crowns and banners looked very grand under silk roofs and painted beams. It was good for men to remember that there was a world outside their tents. The sun was sinking, staining the western sky in bands of orange and purple. A light breeze stirred, cooling the sweat on men's faces. The small table set between the 2 hosts held the scrolls, 2 bowls of softened wax, and 2 seals. Renly's crowned stag, Robb's snarling direwolf. Lords pressed close. Reach knights in their bright surcoats, Stormland's men more battered and plain, northern lords in furs, river lords in patched mail. They formed a ragged circle around the 2 kings, curiosity and skepticism and hope all warring in their eyes. Renly spoke first, of course. "We stand here as 2 kings," he called out, voice carrying. 2 men with claims, with swords, with banners. We could waste our strength bleeding each other on these fields, while the lions laugh in their golden den. Or we can do what wolves and stags do best when the hunters come. We can run together and bring down something larger than either of us. Soft laughter, a few appreciative shouts. The great Jon grinned. Loras looked as if he would rather be on a battlefield. Robb stepped forward when Renly gestured. He was not so practiced a speaker, but there was a quiet authority in him now that did not depend on flourish. "The men who named me king in the north did it because they were tired of fighting for other men's thrones," he said. "Tired of marching south to bleed in fields whose names their grandchildren will never know. I will not ask them to do that again lightly." But Tywin Lannister spilled northern blood and called it justice. He burned the Riverlands and called it policy. He put a boy with no right on a throne built by other men's swords. He glanced once toward the distant south, where King's Landing lay unseen. "That I cannot let stand." He rested his hand briefly on the direwolf seal. "I do not bend," he said, "but I stand beside. The North will fight beside Renly Baratheon to break the lions and tear their cub from the throne. In return, the North and Trident will stand free. Steel for steel, blood for blood. That is the bargain." A murmur, louder this time. Some Southerners looked uneasy at such bluntness. Others nodded slowly. Margaery's eyes shone. Renly dipped the stag's seal into the wax, then pressed it to his scroll with a firm hand. The red wax bulged up around the golden imprint. A moment later, Robb did the same with his wolf, the green wax taking the shape of bared teeth and flaring fur. It was done. The pact at Bitterbridge was not a thing any man could hold, like a sword or a cup. It lived in ink and wax and the breath of men, in the choices they would make in the days to come. Still, as the two kings stepped back and the first cheer rose up, Catelyn felt something shift, like a board in a long bridge settling into place. Night settled over Bitterbridge, but sleep did not come easily. The southern camp sang late, songs rising and falling in waves. Battle songs, bawdy ditties, the inevitable ballads of lost loves and promised victories. Somewhere, someone was trying to teach a northern man the steps of some reach dance, if the laughter and repeated curses were any indication. Inside their tent, all was quieter. The others had gone, eventually. Karstark grumbling, Theon still grinning at some off-color jest, Roose slipping out like a pale shadow. Only Robb remained, sitting on the low stool as if he had forgotten how to stand, his hands hanging loosely between his knees. Grey Wind's breathing was the slow, steady rasp of a sleeping animal at his feet. Catelyn stood behind him a moment longer, watching the curve of his neck, the way the candlelight picked out the new lines at his eyes. Then she set her hands on his shoulders, fingers gentle through the leather. "You did well," she said quietly. He let out a breath that was half a laugh, half a groan. "You sound surprised." "I sound relieved," she corrected. "That's not the same." He reached up and rested one of his hands over hers, squeezing once. "Do you think he'll keep his word?" he asked. "Renly. For now," she said. "Men keep their pacts while it suits them. The question is how long that will be. We'll know more once the lions begin to feel the teeth at their throats." He nodded, though she felt the tension in him still. "I thought it would feel different," he admitted after a moment. "Making deals like this, sealing something that big. I expected to feel like a king." "And what do you feel like?" she asked. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was very small, very young. "Like a boy in my father's boots," he said, trying not to trip. Her throat tightened. She bent and pressed her forehead briefly to the top of his head, the way she had when he was a child frightened by a storm. "Every king is that boy," she murmured. "Some just learn to hide it better than others. Your father never truly did. It was one of the things I loved most about him." She straightened. "We've bought you something today, Robb. Time, space, a chance to breathe and plan instead of simply swinging until your arms give out." He tilted his head back to look up at her. In his eyes, she saw the boy who had chased Bran through Winterfell's halls, and the man who had ridden into the teeth of the Lannisters' charge and come out the other side. "And what will we do with that time?" he asked. She thought of the Raven at Castle Black, of Jon reading the words written in his brother's hand, of Bran and Rickon at Winterfell, of Sansa and Arya in the Red Keep, of Stannis on Dragonstone, of Balon Greyjoy on his rock. Of all the pieces on the board they could not yet see clearly. "We use it," she said simply. "We sharpen every edge we have. We gather every ally we can. We make sure that when the storm finally breaks over this realm, it breaks where we have chosen, not where our enemies do." Robb's gaze drifted to the tent wall, as if he could see beyond it to the vast, sleeping camp. "Two kings," he said softly. "Two hammers. Gods help the lions between us." "And gods help us," Catelyn added, just as softly. "If we forget that there are storms north and south that care nothing for hammers or for kings." Outside, the wind picked up, fluttering the tent's edge against its ropes. Somewhere in the camp, a sentry called out, his cry swallowed quickly by the night. Grey Wind twitched in his sleep, paws moving as if he ran in some dream forest. In the darkness between candle and canvas, the future stretched out, full of blood and possibility. The pact at Bitterbridge had been made. Now the world would rise or fall to meet it,